Welcome to the Beyond Crude podcast, a EACOP campaign podcast that goes beyond the headlines to help us understand the impacts that the communities in Uganda and Tanzania are facing as a result of the huge East African crude oil pipeline project, a 1,443 kilometer pipeline that is starting all the way in Hoima and terminating in Tanga, Tanzania. Today, we are centering our conversation around the Earth Day, and the theme for this year's Earth Day is Our People, Our Power, and it's a rallying call to have communities pull together, governments, and the civil society to ensure that we power the future through renewable energy. Today, I'm having three guests who are going to introduce themselves. Omar El-Mawi, Rukia Hamis, and Baraka Lenga. Baraka Lenga will be joining us in a bit, but we're going to begin with these two. Please, Omar.
Thank you, Abud. Greetings, our good listeners from wherever you're listening to us today. My name is Omar El-Mawi, and I like to think of myself as working for the people of Africa. And the role that I normally take up within pushing for that important job is convening a space we call the Africa Movement Building Space, which just pushes to bring as many Africans as possible working together towards realizing the potential and the promise that Africa holds. So in a nutshell, that is what I try to do every day when I wake up in the morning until when I sleep at night.
Thank you.
Back to you, Adit.
Thank you, Omar. Omar will be helping us look at the economic angle and the economic viability of this project. Rukia?
Thank you, Abud, and thank you to my fellow panelists, Omar, as well. Hello, everyone. My name is Rukia Hamis. I'm a Pan-African, but Kenyan-born. I currently coordinate and support the Africa Booker Network that is hosted by 350 Africa. And it's a network that brings together grassroots community groups from different parts of the continent, working on trainings, coaching, networking, and storytelling.
Thank you, Rukia. And Rukia will also help us look at the potentials of renewable energy in the continent and beyond. So I will start with you, Omar, as we still wait for Baraka to join us. Can you break down the financial challenges EACOP faces, particularly the 5 billion investment requirement with the 60% still unsecured? And then remember that we are quite aware that even though they recently shared, and when I say they, I mean EACOP Limited, recently shared that they had closed their first tranche of loan, we realized that it's taken many years. And at the beginning, this project was 5 billion. Is it still 5 billion? Has it increased? And help us understand that as you break this down. Thank you.
Thank you, Abid. And I'm proceeding assuming that people have the background of what EACOP is and all that it pertains to, because we've had a series of these. And for those who are just joining now, please look the previous series and you will get more context in terms of the project itself and the background. Now, delving straight to the question. So when this project was sold to us, we were told that it's going to cost about $5 billion. But I will be speaking to this because of the intense delays and a lot of opposition from Uganda, from Tanzania, and also across the globe. There've been a lot of impact in terms of that price range and how it's been moving. Now, the project itself initially was supposed to be 40% of it was supposed to be financed through equity, which means that the people who have a percentage shareholding of the project will be raising that money internally from their own coffers. And then 60% was supposed to come from loan financing, which means that they will be getting loans from other financial institutions. And if you were doing those calculations quickly, I think from the 5 billion, it would have been 2 billion is supposed to be raised internally, and then 3 billion is supposed to be raised as loans. Now, because there was a lot of pushback, a lot of opposition, in terms of protest, in terms of people reaching out to banks, in terms of court cases and many other opposition processes and examples and activities. Things have changed since then. So now we've had over 42 banks that have very publicly confirmed that they don't want anything to be involved with the East African crude oil pipeline. And now things have changed a little bit. So the project has shot from 5 billion. Now it stands at about 5.8 billion, which is definitely at least 800 million US dollars more. They have now, because they are really struggling to get the financing, because all the financing that they've received so far is about 5 institutions that have given about 200 million, committed to give about $200 million each. So it's about $1 billion that is sort of committed as financing. They're still 4.8 billion US dollars short of closing this financial process. So they've now changed, and they've decided that instead of 40% coming from equity and 60% from loans, now they've made the opposite way. So it's now 60% that is supposed to come from equity, and 40% is supposed to come from loan. So as you can see, there's a lot of pushback, and therefore they have to change things. They are making a lot of noise in terms of trying to show that $1 billion has been confirmed and committed already. But, it's just to try and boost that investor confidence and get maybe other companies or other financial institutions that are still thinking to want to be involved. But in real sense, they haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to the financing itself. Now, specifically to the question, apologies, I went to that background to begin with, and I'll try to be very, very quick. Despite the environmental, health, social impacts that are clear about this project, because, for instance, we know that 34 million tons of carbon emissions are going to be emitted every year if that project is going to see the light of day. And this is a figure that has not been in any way disputed, even by the project proponents themselves. So it's a fact at this point, because no one has said anything in the negative, or at least to challenge this figure. Now, there are those that will say, all of this could be justified because of the expected oil returns that Uganda and Tanzania will be getting, of the job opportunities that will be coming from the same. But in real sense, when you look deeper and you dig deeper, you realize that actually Uganda and Tanzania have had a very bad deal when it comes to the EACOP projects. First, if you look at the ownership itself, Uganda and Tanzania only each own about 15% of the shares of the East African crude oil pipeline. So therefore, whatever profits that are going to be coming from this project, they only get 30% that they have to divide between the two of them. 70% goes elsewhere. And this is countries that are saying they are sovereign, that these are resources that are coming from their country and they're supposed to be supporting them and their people. They've settled for 30%, 15% each, 70% goes elsewhere. If you also look at the job example or the job justification angle, people who've looked at the East Africa crude oil pipeline, they've said the jobs that could be coming from that project are about 5,000 temporary jobs, and only 300 are going to be permanent. But I'll be speaking a little bit later in terms of how other jobs are going to be affected. So there are actually more and more jobs that are actually going to be affected. And then lastly, is the fact that, if there are going to be any oil revenues, one thing that people have to understand that these are not revenues that will be coming together. This is a project that has been proposed in the early 2011, 2012, thereabout. Right now, the project is not yet operational. It will be at least another 10 to maybe 20 years before that comes into play. And therefore, they won't be seeing any of those revenues in the next 10 or so years, while there are sectors that are already being affected. And then finally, the Ugandan government has already, the conservative numbers I've seen, they've already invested close to about 45 million US dollars in the EACOP project. This is money that they've taken from their budget or amount that they could use every year to provide key services to their citizens. This includes, services that could have gone to education, to health, and other ways of adding value to people's lives. They've invested into this project, and none of that money has come back. They've already invested money on building roads, on building airports to serve this area that they're planning to do the oil exploration, oil exploitation, and the EACOP. And none of that money has come back to them in terms of to them to support their people. So for me, and from the figures that I'm seeing, this project seems to be benefiting only the bigger companies involved, that is Total and China National Offshore Oil Company, and Uganda and Tanzania are getting a very bad deal out of it. And it's going to be very hard for anyone to convince me that this doesn't continue to add to the examples of continual projects that are exploitative, that are colonial in nature, that are taking advantage of countries because they are taking everything from these two countries, especially Uganda at this point, from the oil exploration and exploitation, while leaving a lot of impact to its people, nature, and climate. So it's a very, very bad deal, and not just from the environment and climate angle, but even from the economic angle. It's causing a lot of negative impact in their budget and the people of these two countries. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you for that very comprehensive response. And I think anyone listening can see that this is sometimes the challenge with our leadership, that they do not help make better decisions, or rather do not have, it would seem, the best interest of the public in mind. And I think that's a perfect segue to come to you, Rukia, as someone who champions renewable energy and has worked with communities on this sector. I wonder, with what Omar has explained, could it be that people are not seeing what are the potentials of renewable energy in East Africa? Could you speak about that? What are the potentials? Because I wonder, with all this information is shared, how is it that this is the route that we are taking?
Thank you, Abud. And I really appreciated Omar's breakdown of, the East African crude oil pipeline and its impacts. The fun fact about fossil fuel treaties or contracts, these pieces of work are always long-term. They have found themselves in a situation where you find yourselves in a contract with a country for long-term, 20 plus years, where you're stuck with a project that is not for the future. And sadly, most of these contracts that, our communities get into with these multi-corporations extend protection even after the exit and termination of such projects. So for example, if you had a crude oil pipeline that was placed in Tanzania and Uganda, that would lock in our communities for a long time with minimal benefits. So I guess this is a segue into why we need alternatives in the first place, and why we need to think about alternatives as communities and local groups and economies as well. Is because Africa as a continent has always found itself on the bad end of the economics. We always find ourselves as followers of what technology we receive, etc. But the funny thing is, we have brilliant examples of African countries that are really taking on renewable energy, and really forefronting it. Case in point, without bias, Kenya, for example, has massive geothermal capacities and capabilities that have lasted us for the longest time. We use a big chunk of our communities and households and people here use renewable energy to support their work, right? And if Kenya has done it, Kenya is not the only country that has been able to, to have access to such alternatives. So there is geothermal as a good source of energy that communities have used before. We've tried it out and it works. There is solar, which is the common one that most people speak of. And the beauty about solar energy or community-led solar energy, it's easy to decentralize it. It's easy for it to be spread out from mini grids to massive plants to small solar on top of a home, So it's a very easy technology that can be used to be spread out across communities. There's also wind. I know there's elements to wind also that has issues as well. Obviously, when we're looking at alternatives for communities, we're not looking at alternatives or renewable energy that still propagates the same system issues that fossil fuels has always brought in. But we're looking at models of renewable energy that really bring in the energy of the future, how we want to see power distributed, how we want to see energy access being shown. So obviously there's wind farms, and there are issues with massive wind farms where they take on large chunks of land, they affect birds, etc. But we've seen decentralized versions of wind farms. So they're like mini wind farms in communities that support just a small community to access power. Finally, or there's hydro. So hydroelectric power, that's another piece of, energy that Kenya itself has taken on for the longest time and has supported us. And it's something that I've seen in other communities as well in Ethiopia, Uganda, that have also taken on hydroelectric power as a big source of energy, as an energy alternative than fossil fuels. So apart from maybe countries like maybe South Africa or some countries in Northern Africa, Africa itself doesn't really rely heavily on fossil fuels. And, when you look at energy, you look at who's the consumer. Yeah. You look at households, industry, infrastructure. Fossil fuels are mainly in the infrastructure sector and sometimes in the industry sector. But the biggest users, who are the households, rarely use, fossil fuels on a day-to-day basis. Like, for example, in Kenya, the power we use in our homes is from the HEP, hydroelectric power, and etc. So it shows you that if we're looking at alternatives and we're looking about the transition, we really need to look at the bigger users. Who are the users of the energy we're asking for, and how can we support them to access that? So if we're looking at alternatives, or if you're pushing away, we're looking to push out of fossil fuels, we need to really work alongside the communities that are actually using the energy. A big chunk of, like, for example, I'll tell you about Benin. Benin is a country that imports energy from other countries like Ghana. Doesn't produce its own energy. And the beauty about renewable energy and all these other projects is if we convince investors to really put in money where it's needed, then countries in different parts of the continent will really take up leading the just transition and showcasing the alternative that really works for the communities that are actually using this energy. Thanks, Abby.
Thanks for that as well. You've reminded me that actually Kenya has been doing a good job in terms of the geothermal power. And I did read somewhere that some time back, I think they've been helping Djibouti also to utilize their geothermal power as well. So I think I'm just saying that based off of what you've said, that Benin relies on Ghana. And I think if African countries could think of ways of, technology transfer, like what Kenya is doing with Djibouti, and even supporting each other in these renewable energy projects, and particularly geothermal, because it can be easily a base load compared to, say, coal, that would be an amazing thing. And I think this is a good point to shift conversation. Baraka Lenga finally joined us. Baraka, as you introduce yourself, I would like you also to help us understand how are the communities in Tanzania receiving this project, EACOP?
At the beginning, people had thought about, it will be great. This project is going to create some jobs. But also people were told about, improving their livelihoods. But what is their facing so far that is not true? For example, we have 50,000 of people, South Tanzania, where this project is expected to catapult to. This place will compare us. But that is not the case. 60,000 these are people who have been directly impacted. But you also have some people who, who never had the land, but their livelihoods were directly, associated with the land. Like there are people who need to come, to people for their survival. There are people who need to graze cattle, for their survival. But so far, all of them, they can no longer accept those lands because the land have been taken for the public. But also the issues regarding the land acquisition process, people are not happy about how the EACOP team acquired the land from the project affected the pastor. So we are hearing the issues of unfair compensation, the issues of daily compensation. So and for example, currently people's land, the evaluation and the assessment process were done in 2017, 2022. And then people received their compensation in 2020, 2021. But something which is very clear that they are observing currently is that, people have already received their compensation. And then the EACOP team is coming back, telling them that they are supposed to add 3 more meters from, that kilometers from the land that were not, that are not assessing or evaluating. So you can see from that how the thing is. But also we have the issue of resistance from the resistant advocates from the civil society organizations. The number of organizations that are coming out and they're resisting about this project is now increasing. From the individuals are coming in resisting about this project, but also the organizations are also increasing. So that's what I could say. Thank you.
Could you point out maybe some specific concerns that local residents are having or have raised about this project's impact on their land, their water sources, and livelihoods?
The concern that the local residents are raising regarding this project on the land, water sources, on the livelihoods, starting from the land is that people's land, people are unfair and involuntarily, evicted from their land. Most of the people were not okay, for their land regarding the compensation rates that were, that were told this is the affected land that are going to be given so that you can leave this land. And most of the people were not okay with that compensation. So on the land, that is how it's been. But also, most of the people feel like the compensation in time. Like your land is going to be affected and then you are not going to compensate in time. We said give you another land. Most of them are complaining that the land that they are given is not, perfect, like the land they used to have. But also some of those who used to, to live close to the social services have been taken away from where the social services are. So you can see from the land percentage how the east is. But also the water sources, the pattern in the come across, from Uganda coming across, the destination is going to be Songolan Port, the Chingolan Port in the Indian Ocean. So you can see, like in the Indian Ocean, the water sources used to provide used to provide the fish so that people could survive. But first they used to provide some income. Those two fish used to stay the fish there and then and some people they are surviving. But so far they are facing the challenge to the extent that they cannot access some areas that they used to cut across to get fish. But also in their livelihoods, 99% of the people who are going to be affected by this project, depended on agriculture for their survival. So you can see, like, you are editing them from their land when they need to catch there. You are giving them the compensation in cash. To the extent that most of them cannot replace the lost land. So this implies that their livelihood is going to be affected. But also, those people, when they are given the money, most of them came out with the issues of EBITDA, after they didn't consider the issue of, the issue of gender. Most of the money were given to the men, so women were left behind. Those men, after receiving the money, most of them turned, they added more wives and the rest to the wife whom they had. So this is another social aspect I could say. But also on the livelihoods, which is that as Omar said before, this project is going to amplify climate change by emitting 34 million tons of carbon dioxide. This means that by amplifying climate change, this means that we affect the livelihoods of the people whose survival depends on a rain-fed agriculture. So that's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for providing clarity on that point. Omar, coming to you, already it feels very negative from everything you said, from the economics point, from what Baraka is saying with the impacts on communities, and even the obvious, or maybe not so obvious, alternative options that Rukia is discussing in renewable energy. What is your opinion of all this now that we keep hearing, bearing in mind what Baraka has just said, but we keep on hearing that, oil projects bring economic benefits to host countries. But with what we're hearing already, and you did allude to this, that it's not even something that the revenue will start trickling in now. We're talking about decades or maybe several years from now. What's your assessment of the actual economic returns Ugandans and Tanzanians might see?
Well, I have tried to sit, stand, and jump to try and see the economic benefits from near and far. And the bad news is I can't come up with many, but I'll try and answer this question. So I think one thing that I should mention as to just give context to this is that it's very hard for countries to be rich and make a lot of money from oil, especially in the African context. Yeah, I know people will mention examples of the Arabian countries, Norway, and the rest, and those were a little bit different. I'll be happy to speak more about them, but there are many things that are different than they are now because of where we are on climate. Because of even the deals that we are signing with the oil companies, and also because most of these other countries like Norway are now even looking at divesting. For instance, they are looking at divesting their biggest sovereign wealth fund, which is actually the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. They are transitioning it away from long-term dependence on oil because they also are clear. It's clear to them that in the long time, oil is not the answer. Yeah, and therefore in Africa, if countries could be rich from oil, then the best country example will be Nigeria. But it's actually the exact opposite that has happened. Tanzania, I would argue, has actually been made more poor because of oil. Since they're very dependent on that revenue, they're getting very minimal resources. And if any one of us could, if you don't know an example of how oil has really affected a country, just Google the Niger Delta and see how it's really been affected. The people living in Niger Delta, to give context, is they were impacted heavily because of oil extraction and all the aspects of life, including livelihoods, has been so impacted that right now the life expectancy in Niger Delta is about 40 years. So if you go beyond 40 years, you're actually considered an ancestor, right? So you consider yourself very lucky that you've seen more years than you should have. That's how bad it is. Now, for EACOP, it even is worse because what they don't tell most people about is they actually passed a law, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Act, through the Parliament of Uganda. And I believe a similar law was also passed in Tanzania. I'm not so sure, but I believe one was. But the Ugandan one, for instance, you will see they've given, via their law, that the profits and the operations that are coming from EACOP, they're given what they're calling a 10-year tax holiday. What this means is that for 10 years, when it starts being operational, these guys won't be paying a single cent as taxes from the proceeds that are coming from this project. Now, for context, the project is planned to be about 25 years, the operational life of the EACOP. So if 10 of those years, no taxes are going to be paid, and oil being a finite process, if I am Total Energies, for instance, and there are worse people than I am there, but if I was working for them, I will actually be advising them, let's export and exploit as much of the oil within those 10 years, so that after that, actually, there's nothing significant for us to exploit. And therefore, we've gotten a lot from the deal. We've not paid any taxes, and we've benefited from the process. So I don't know who advised them to come up with this law that's actually even making them having an even worse and worse deal as things progress. So that's really, really significant. I already mentioned that, the only benefits that they've been pushing for was that they're going to provide cheap energy, cheaper oil for Uganda and Tanzania. But that's not true, because if the plan was to provide cheap energy, then why are you building a 1,400 kilometer pipeline terminating at a port just so that you can get this oil from a landlocked country into the next available tanker and get it to the rest of the world? So it's an exploitative project that all Uganda and Tanzania are actually doing is they're acting as a petrol station where the global north are coming to extract as much as they can and pay pennies to the dollars from the resources, and then take this oil to their countries. And then in the next 25 years, when that, if not in the next 10 years since it becomes operational, when that project becomes stranded assets, they'll be left with roads that they don't have any use for because they're supporting that pipeline and those oil projects. They'll be left with an airport that maybe doesn't have any use for because it's supposed to be supporting the oil projects. And then they will also be left with industries that have been affected significantly. I'll be speaking about them in a bit, including agriculture, tourism, fishing, that are employing millions, like millions and millions of people, just so that you can create 5,000 jobs temporarily and 300 jobs permanently. And your guess is as good as mine. Most of these jobs certainly won't be going to the people of Uganda and Tanzania.
Thanks, Omar. If now we're saying that we should pivot to renewable energy, I think one of the things or words or phrases I hear a lot is technology transfer. And the argument there being that technology transfer is crucial for renewable energy adoption in developing regions. So, Rukia, what does effective technology transfer look like in practice?
Yeah, thanks, Abid. This is a very interesting question. And it's interesting because of the theme around our power, our planet. It's all about, how do we use what we have to get where we need to get, right? And recently I was in a gathering called the Renewable Power Gathering. And the main theme around it was around how Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous communities are leading the pathway to the solutions, and especially energy solutions that they want to see. And technology transfer is a big player in that space, right? So one, just to break out technology transfer means that you are swapping, I'll use the word swapping, technology from those who've done it better to those who want to try it out as well, right? So, for example, earlier I mentioned how Kenya's done really well around geothermal. And, Abud added how geothermal has been, we're trying to support Djibouti with the same kind of work around geothermal as well. And that's a case study around intra-technology transfer or, swap around what technology can be used where. But now, looking deeply in terms of renewable energy, right? I think no one can succeed by themselves. I think we need to really come together to fix, the problems that are coming up or have been propagated with the use of fossil fuels for the longest time. Omar mentioned around the Niger Delta issue. For years, communities in the Niger Delta have been unable to farm their lands because they were affected by the oil spills, etc. And now our communities are asking ourselves, okay, you don't want us to use fossil fuels, right? You're saying fossil fuels are bad. Then what next? And we're saying, okay, use renewable energy. But then the question comes again, how do we use renewable energy? How do we tap into that? Do you have, can you train us? Can you support us? Right? And so far, climate organizations, civil society have found ways to teach and train around renewable energy by working alongside experts in the space. But then we need to expand it to make it a bit more large scale. In Kenya, in other countries, there's been a lot of technology transfer in the sense of investment. So we've opened up our borders as the African continent to investors that are working on storage and batteries and transforming the infrastructure from buses that are using petrol and diesel to electric buses. There's a lot of work happening now with Tesla and the e-mobility movement. And e-mobility has been quite popular in the different countries in Africa. We've seen e-mobility in motorcycles industry. We've seen e-mobility in the bus sector and the public sector. But then to expand that away from just e-mobility, but also just looking at it in terms of even medicine, etc., we need to look at different models that have worked. So one, there's a massive need for research. And this research is supposed to help us understand, yes, we need technology transfer, but where do we need it? Which sectors are we trying to transition in terms of using renewable energy? Are we looking at the medicine sector? I think during COVID, we learned a massive lesson that we really need to make our hospitals off-grid because, for example, patients that were on life support, if power went out, those patients are done for, right? And renewable energy offers energy security that can support the medicine or the medical, the health sector be able to have security for their patients, but also just security overall, right? We looked at also sectors like another piece of focus where research needs to be is what kind of technology do we want, right? So we've looked at who needs the technology in terms of research, but we also need to look about who's the user of this technology, who is our target audience, or who's our target, what is the word for it? I keep missing this word. The target niche, right? Are we looking at household? Are we looking at transport? Are we looking at industries, etc.? So that's another big piece around that. Then obviously there needs to look at research in terms of who's funding that transfer or that technology. Because as you know, the one who gives you the money controls you somehow. So research needs to we need to really dive deeper into research around, yes, we want this technology, but who's funding and who's financing it? And then finally, will be around what technology are we promoting in the first place? So I think you've heard about the critical mineral debate, and reiterating again that we really need to be careful that, yes, we are advocating for alternatives, but we need to pick alternatives that do not propagate the same systematic issues because the fossil fuel industry has propagated for years and years on, right? So apart from just the research, so once we've done the research, we've understood our target audience, what technology, who's funding us, etc. Now it's a matter of implementation, right? Now it's come to us. We've been told, yes, this is the research. This is what you need. Our governments have received the funding. Now there needs to be a sense of, I would call them watchdogs, to really keep our governments in check, right? To make sure that, yes, this money is for technology transfer. I know a bunch of colleagues of mine, Omar and Baraka and others who've been in the different COPs or conference of parties that have happened in the past few years, have been advocating for reparations to fund technology transfer as well into communities in Africa, right? But then sadly, with corruption and etc., we know that if we don't put watchdogs and guardrails into the funds that go into technology transfer, we'll end up in a situation where the 1% will benefit from this quote unquote technology transfer. Then we'll have the entrepreneurs coming in, trying to support 1, 2, 3, saying they'll take on this. And then we'll be back to square one where our communities haven't really benefited from the technology transfer. And then finally, I think the watchdog section or the watchdog list or the people who will be really ensuring that technology transfer is people first and people centered needs to be community driven. It needs to encompass indigenous communities. It also needs to include community reps that are coming from, fossil fuel affected or project affected communities. So people who are trying to transition away from old, useless technology that is coal, etc. So we need to ensure that the committee of watchdogs that have to be included in every conversation that the government takes in terms of how they want to see the technologies transfer leading the just transition. A couple of friends of mine are working on something called the Just Energy Transition Principles. As you know, a big chunk of countries are already receiving reparations or funding that is supposed to help them transition to other forms of technology. And with the work that my colleagues are working on it's provided guardrails of sorts or principles that support how that could look like. And I think that's a good piece of work that people can look out for and maybe learn on to understand what the Just Energy Transition partnerships look like and what the Just Energy Transition principles are talking about and how can we really support our communities to have technology that is for us, by us, and is really people-centered and also really brings in the benefits, but also at the final time, looking at economic viability, because we don't want technology transfer that still ends up making us poor, right? At the end of the day, yes, we still want economic development in our countries. That's like a big priority for us, but we want profits that don't really put people on the sidelines, right? We want, profits are like secondary, people first, and then the profits will come. But to do that, we really need to involve everyone. And when you say everyone, we need to involve the communities that are actually going to be taking on that technology. And then finally, I think someone mentioned a couple of weeks ago, and I was chatting about this around technology transfer. And they say that for it to be very effective, it needs to be locally led. There's situations where technology is made outside our communities or outside our countries and then brought into us. And we've seen issues with that as well, where someone receives a solar panel that's supposed to last them 20 years, and then you find yourself with a solar panel that only lasts you 2 years. So if we maximize locally led, highly effective technology that has guardrails and principles that guide what kind of technology comes to us, then that means we can control the quality of the technology that comes to our communities. But then if it is locally produced, then that means we remove the dependency where we are now depending on someone else to show us the technology. But better yet, we are actually giving empowerment or empowering our communities to really learn those skills so that they can pass it on for future generations to come, right? So it's not someone else coming into our communities, into our countries, teaching us the technology, or not teaching us, or doing the technology on behalf of us, leaving, and then we're left asking them for future times, right? So a big piece for technology transfer to be long-term or to be successful and to happen over time and really last for years is we need our local communities to really be the leaders of that technology transfer. They need to be part of the trainings. They need to learn how to use that technology, and they need to know how to maintain it, but also obviously learn how to be innovative with it long-term. So yes, I guess that's mainly it. How I see the future of technology transfer, looking like for now. I think it's already working intra-country in different countries like Ethiopia and Kenya and Djibouti and other countries. And it will be interesting to just see what more innovations come when, we sit together as a continent and really swap, tactics. Because I feel like we have the capacity to really get ourselves out of this, what I'll say, fossil fuel addiction, right? And we need to really step out of that addiction and really look at options that are available in our communities. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. I think your point around making sure energy for who for whom, and what is in the best interest, and the whole theme around centering everything around the community so that it is community-led is a good opportunity to bring in Baraka. And I will take us back to the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline project. So, Baraka, how have the project developers engaged with local communities? Do people in Tanzania, for instance, feel that their voices are being heard in the decision-making process, or is this just being bulldozed?
From my perspective and from what I understand is that, the voice of the local people, the local people do not feel their voice have meaning, like their voice are heard. Most of the people, the project affected persons are complaining that they are forcibly evicted from their land, For example, if you meet the Tattoo community, this is the indigenous community. They were supposed to, to be taken into the principles of free and prior and informed consent. But these people were not were not consulted. They found themselves, being given the compensation and being taken away from their land. But also, the CSO community. We are always facing the intimidation, the threats, from the government, from the, from that EACOP side. So from what I can summarize from this is that local community, doesn't, the voice of the local community doesn't have a meaningful implication on the EACOP team. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think because of time, we're just going to now have a final last take for everyone. So we'll go back to you, Omar. What's your final take on this conversation? Anything that I may not have asked that you think is burning that you'd want to share with our listeners?
No, definitely. Thanks, Abid. And if you've listened very keenly to my fellow colleagues who've also shared some very good insights on EACOP and the impacts and why it doesn't make sense, you will see that and come to the same conclusion that this is actually a project that is problematic, that doesn't help anyone in Uganda or Tanzania or the world, but it's actually going to be business as usual for big oil companies making as much profit as possible at the expense of everyone else. And therefore, for me, is to continue telling colleagues and telling friends listening that it's really important for us to join and be part of Uganda, be angry the same as we're seeing Uganda and Tanzania angry today, because this is a project that doesn't just stop at impacting these two communities, but it also affects the whole continent at large. And lastly, it's to the extent of we need to be thinking beyond countries, because unfortunately, one of the things that we've really been sold with these colonial borders is now all of us are thinking first as countries and not necessarily as a continent at large. It's important for us to look at, power pools. How do we benefit from resources? How do we, the renewable energy resources that we have within the continent, support the continent first before we even send them out of the continent? And I think if we really look at these opportunities that we have in an extent of adding value to them and utilizing them for the continent to provide the energy for this over 600 million people that are energy poor, to tap to the renewable energy opportunity that we have, that we've only just barely scratched the surface, because they're saying only 2% of the renewable energy investment, global renewable energy investment, is coming to Africa, when actually Africa has 60% of the best solar potential in the whole world. So let's look at these opportunities. Let's see how do we actualize them and activate them as a continent. Because the unfortunate thing is no company, no country from out of the continent will come here wanting to really develop the continent. All they will want to do is take advantage of us, exploit as much of our resources as possible, and then leave us behind to suffer those impacts to our people, to our nature, and definitely to our climate. I'll stop there, urging Ubuntu that I am because we are, and let's work together towards realizing the Africa we all want to see.
Thank you, Omar. Rukia, your final take?
Yes, thank you, Abiyud, and thank you, Omar. That was a beautiful summary. I think my final take to friends out there is we really need to come together and collaborate. Back to the Ubuntu, I think it's quite crucial. It's a very crucial time for us to be in solidarity with each other, and not just the solidarity of placards and and songs or whatever. It's more like really deep solidarity where you really empathize with what the community groups happening, in the project FFA persons in the EACOP route are going through, and really feeling that empathy and feeling that you're moved to really support that work and supporting stop this project that does not have any sense, that doesn't make sense to our communities. But apart from just like collaboration, I think we really need as a community and as a continent to set clear renewable energy targets. We keep singing that we want an alternative, we want better energy, but what are those better energies? Right now, we've been asked to submit our NDCs, right? And none of us, a few of us have submitted, like a few countries in the continent have submitted, but none of us, other countries have submitted. So without us having clear targets of where we want to go, we really can't get there as a continent. And it's the only way we can really have a sense of, okay, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania wants to be here in the next 2 or 5 years. Then from there, we can really start deep conversations around how can we come together to get ourselves there. I always love to use the COVID example. During COVID, the world was locked out of Africa and Africa was locked out of the world, but somehow we managed to survive. So in this situation where there's fossil fuels and we really want to step away from fossil fuels, I feel like if we are locked out of fossil fuels, I feel like Africa can actually survive, and we have the potential. We have the access to the minerals. We have access to the bright minds and innovations in the continent. We have amazing experts internally in the continent, but also in the diaspora that can really take us from point A to point B in terms of how we want to really see the energy future of the continent. We really need now more than ever to step out into our own and showcase the power of the continent and the people of the continent, really show up and show out that we can lead the just energy transition. And that's actually possible. And Africa can take the whole world to where it needs to be. Thanks, Abhi.
Thank you so much. And finally, Baraka, your last take.
Okay, thank you, Abihud. If EACOP does happen, the impacts of climate change will be felt all over the world, because climate change doesn't respect national borders. So we should all do whatever we can to ensure that this project doesn't happen. Politicians, scientists, religious leaders, activists, let us all do whatever we see that is possible to ensure that this project doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've heard it from our amazing guests. That was a wonderful conversation. Baraka Lenga, Rukia Hamis, and Omar El Mawi. Thank you for joining episode 8.